All right, as y'all know, 30 minutes is not very long, so we've got about a sitcom here to go. So let's go to Genesis 19, and we will pick up in verse 15. That's where we were at a couple weeks ago. We're looking at the city of Sodom, and you remember the two angels have come to the household of Lot. One of the things I found kind of interesting going back and thinking was those two angels were really there for Lot. God did not need them there in order to destroy the land. That happens after they have exodus Lot out of the land. They go into Sodom for him and for his family. I was just I was thinking about that, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a reality. And so that's where I want to pick up. Let's go to Genesis 19, as I mentioned, and let's begin reading at verse 15 and catch what's going on. If you'll read with me, this is the English Standard Version. This is, let me say this, this is just after they had told Lot, go, and if there's any family here, anyone, you go and get them now. And you remember when he goes to his sons-in-laws, what's their reaction? They scoff. They think he's joking. He's jesting, right? And so as that's the background to 15. Let's go to 15. As morning dawned, the angels urged, think about that word, urged Lot, saying, take your wife and your two daughters who are here. Now those sons-in-laws, who were they just married or engaged to? These two daughters, right? And so he says, take your wife, your two daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. And then you have verse 16. But he lingered. Now keep that in mind. Number one, you go back to the beginning of that verse and it says, they what? They urged him. They pressed him. Right? Why are they urging him? He wasn't moving. And later on we find out, what was he doing? He was lingering. Now just keep all this in mind as we go through this narrative, right? Lot he's not as eager to leave as was Abraham when he left, when God had called him to leave Haran. Lot is lingering. He's lingering so much that notice what has to happen. So the men, the angels, what? Seized him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand. You might think about when you're in a store with a child and you're trying to get through the toy section. They want to linger, right? Sometimes you got to reach down, grab that hand and say, we're going, right? They're not eager to move on. You are. And you're trying to move along. Well, here they're having to grab them by the hand and let's go. Also think it's kind of important to remember. So when we think about sin, I've preached this sermon, I've heard other men preach it, but I think these points lay out really well. Sin takes you where you don't want to go. It keeps you longer than you want to stay, and it will cost you more than you want to pay. Well, think about Lot as an example of that. Think about the Lot that when he separated from Abraham was a very wealthy man. He had lots of goods, he had servants, he had a big horde with him. He's been in this very evil city, and as the angels are having to grab him and pull him out, he's left with what? Very little in the way of material goods. Whatever they could carry, that's what they got. It's not all the big herds and everything else they used to have. All that's gone. And it's just him, his wife, and his two daughters. And as you're going to note in a minute, there's even a problem with that number as he's leaving. So just think about that. This very wealthy man went into this city, this very wicked place, and look at what it's done to him just overall. Yes, sir.
Well, that also makes a point about they took him by the hand. It says, and then the Lord being merciful to him. It's like he really would. If it hadn't been for the angels, he would have been destroyed as well.
That's my second point. You want a definition of mercy. Here's a definition of mercy. Right? We think about mercy and grace. This is the way the easy definition to remember is grace is receiving what you do not deserve, right? It's, it's getting the inheritance that you didn't work for, right? But somebody just left it to you. Right? That's grace, right? The inheritance of God is Jesus. You don't deserve it, but God said, here you go. Mercy, on the other side, is not getting what you do deserve. All right? And so here is a man who is struggling with his temptation to linger. And God, what? Being merciful, says, you're coming. And later on, we'll find out why does he do that? Why does he show Lot such great mercy? Because of Abraham. And that's what we'll see at the end later in the text. But he's lingering. Here he is. He's having to be seized. They bring him out of the city. And I don't know if this... Okay, so we'll come back to that. We'll also notice, is he a little bit... Well, hold on just a second. Okay, verse 17. And as they brought them out, one of the angels said, escape for your life. This isn't some little deal, right? They said, this is your life. You need to be a little bit more serious about it. And he's not, I don't think, fully being serious at this point. It says, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills lest you be swept away. And then you have a little bit of negotiation. Lot said to them, oh, no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. And so he says, he makes a request that they allow him not to go all the way to the hills, but to go to this little place called Zoar. And you'll note in the original language, Zoar means little or insignificant. I don't know if that already had that name or if it came later, but that it was a very small community. And you may remember, originally, it was one of those that was marked to be destroyed. Yet, because God wants to show mercy to Lot, he says, okay. The angels allow him to go to Zoar, not all the way as far as he was supposed to go, and he's allowed to go lodge there. Interesting enough, he doesn't even lodge there. He goes and lodges in a cave, rather. So just kind of fascinating. So he makes this negotiation. That gets you through verse 22. All right, verse 23. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. So they've traveled a little ways. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of the heavens. He overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. Now, before we get to Lot's wife, we just notice the devastation of the moment. I mean, it is obvious. We're going to see in a minute that Abraham's even able to be on a mountain and see what's going on. I was in studying this. I want to tell you the right thing here. But sulfur, brimstone, right? You think of brimstone, you might think about preachers preaching a brimstone and fire sermon. You've probably heard that before. But it's sulfur, right? Or sulfurous fire. It says the locale of Sodom is volcanic and sulfurous. The Lord probably miraculously overthrew these cities by causing the release and igniting of inflammable materials, which then fell in destructive showers of fire upon the valley. And if you're looking kind of how God could have made this occur, there are these areas around there that are very volcanoes and sulfuric around it. Turner, do you have something?
On this, I don't know if I hadn't witnessed it myself, how destructive this could be. We used to have clients that would have sulfur burners at their site instead of having to transport sulfuric acid for the danger of it. But brimstone, like you say, is sulfur. It burns anywhere between...
Smells like rotten eggs, doesn't it? Smells like rotten eggs, doesn't it?
It certainly does. About 16 to 1800 to 2600 degrees. When you light it, when it's ignited, it almost has a mesmerizing, if that's the right term, flame. It doesn't get very high. It's blue because it's really hot. It turns into a liquid at that point, and when it's poured out, it pours out as a liquid, but it's all on fire. And I keep thinking, and you have to be upwind of it. You cannot be downwind of it, or
The heat just will...
And I think about these people. If you think about something that hot falling as a liquid, you're probably going to have a wooden roof, which won't last very long. You can't stay in there, obviously it's going to be on fire immediately. And it's not something that if it were to hit your shoulder or hit your head, you take your hand and wipe it off because you lose the function of that hand. I mean, it's going to be that hot. And you can't really run from it because of the gas, because once you get a breath of it, you can't run. I mean, it demobilizes you, you can't breathe, you don't have air. And, it's totally devastating. And I still owe Miss Charlie some silverware for come do some tests, but anyway. It's pretty destructive. So thank you, Turner. That kind of helps illustrate that. So, this was a catastrophic event of a magnitude that was large enough to destroy, several cities in a very large area, comparatively speaking. I know I have, you may have seen different volcanoes erupting. I watched one just a couple weeks ago where a volcano blew out the side rather than the top, and you just watch that, and it's amazing. And the heat that's produced, and then the molten lava that comes out of that, it is just so very destructive. And so God just unleashes this punishment for their wickedness. That also indicates how wicked it had become. God just absolutely, what I find interesting is other places have been condemned by God through time. They've been slated for destruction, but there's something about Sodom and Gomorrah that lives on as a reminder of the wickedness and the punishment for wickedness, the wickedness of sin, good thoughts. Let's keep going here. I want to look at that very next sentence. So you have this one catastrophic event going on, and then you have, now we don't know exactly where they are on this journey, but at one point, the text says in verse 26, but Lot's wife behind him. So notice that just right away. She's not in front or beside him. She is behind him. Now you might want to wonder why. Well, I think the next thing clues us in. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Now, that term or that phrase, look back, it's not, and I was listening to one guy, and I think I thought like this too. In my mind, I always just imagined she just kind of looked back, a quick glance backwards. For my life, I had that. That's not the terminology here. it wasn't she just took a quick glance back. The idea is a lingering pull backwards, right? She was fixated on what was back behind her, and there may be indications in the terminology that she actually turned around and started going back. So I found that very fascinating. There was something that was pulling her. Now I want you to note, just as an explanation of this, let's go to Luke 17. Jesus actually gives us a little clue here. Luke 17. All right, let's go. What's that?
31, 32.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. So let's catch the context. What's he talking about here? Well, he seems to be talking about the second coming, right? And I'm sorry, not in this. He's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Sorry, not second coming. The destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and the warnings from God not to linger in the city of Jerusalem. But when they see these things occurring, they are to get out, leave. And let's go, let's start at verse 31, and I want to read this. On that day, let the one who, and just notice verse 29, what's he talking about? Verse 29, what's that? What's Sodom and Gomorrah, right? He's talking about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's making that comparison to the destruction of Jerusalem, right? Devastation in Sodom, going to be devastation in Jerusalem. All right, go to verse 31. On that day, let the one who is on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take them away. And likewise, let the one who is in the field not turn back. Right? When it begins to occur, get out. Fire. If you get a fire, should you go back in the house to try to grab something that you really like? Try to get out, right? Leave your stuff behind. You want to flee. Don't go back into where the danger is, but get out. He says, do not turn back. Verse 32, and then he gives us this illustration. Remember Lot's wife. And then he adds this. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life will keep it. And what do you think he plugs Lot's wife in the middle of that? What is he trying to say? It seems as though to me, my understanding of this text, is that in some way, and I don't even know how, but in some way she's trying to preserve her old life. She is still fixated on something she had in Sodom, and she cannot let it go. Wow, isn't that a great illustration for us as Christians? Those things that remain in the past that we want to hold on to, right? You got to let them go. And so she is looking back. She has fixated her gaze on where she was, rather than looking forward to where God is sending her. And she's going to pay with it with her life. Turner?
Just real quick, I was reading in Flavius Josephus that he mentions there that she continually looked back. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting too, she was turned into a pillar of salt, and he said at that time, and she's with us today, that pillar of salt evidently was marked out or something in his lifetime. So he died somewhere around the 1st century, right? In the 90s or something.
Yeah.
So,
So could we find her? I doubt it. But
no,
but
we could go in there and find it.
yeah. But her, what happened to her lives on as an illustration for us, doesn't it? I do find this interesting. I don't know what the environment prior to this event was like with the Dead Sea, but we do know what about that area now. There are huge salt deposits. Now, where did those come from? They're likely there were salt deposits there probably before. Why is the Salt Sea so salty? You watch the videos and people get in the water and just how they you can't sink.
Yeah,
You try it.
I did go swimming in the.
Oh, you've been there?
Yeah, and I started floating. It got to about like where my pockets are, my jeans, and you start floating. Like and we had a girl get water splashed in her face. It's unlike it, like the burning from the salt that gets in your nose or your eyes. It's unreal.
How awful would
And
that be?
The salt crystals on the bottom are about that big around.
It's
It's
amazing.
insane. So there's much salt.
And you think about if the ideal here is her looking back, is her actually going back, and she gets caught up in that destruction. I don't know. I don't know exactly how it happened because the text doesn't give us that many clues. I mean, enough to make a clear determination. But we know it was what? It was her holding on to something that she was unwilling to let go of. Whatever that was, she's unwilling to let it go, and she pays with her life. And so now you see Lot becoming even poorer, right? He's lost now not only all the other things that he lost, now he's lost his wife. And he's having to trudge on forward.
But you know the relationship with her daughters, and she was leaving 2-4 daughters behind,
Yeah, so keep that in mind when we get to the bottom half of this, because that's going to come back. I at least want to mention it. All right, so she is leaving 2 daughters behind, at least 2 that we know of. Well, I think when we speak definitively, there are only 2 left at this point. Whether there were more in the city or not, that can be up for debate.
What, Lot had 4 daughters?
I only know him having 2, right? So I don't mean to get that confusion. I only know the 2. All right, so let's move on. Unless you have a big question about it. I only know about the 2.
They didn't get left behind, they left with Lot.
No, but she left them. She is now not with them. She is now a pillar of salt. That's what I mean. Is we'll think like that sometimes when somebody passes away. Who have they left behind? Right? You see, so anyway, a lot to say there. The narrative on Lot's life is an interesting one. Because I struggle with this a little bit, and I'll tell you why. If you go to 2 Peter chapter 2, and we'll probably have to end right here. I wanted to get to the last section. We may try to. But according to 2 Peter chapter 2, what does Peter call Lot? Not faithful. Even a stronger term than that, I would think. He calls him righteous. Righteous Lot. In the midst of wickedness, Lot stands out as a righteous man. So I may not understand completely how that's determined by God, but I know God did determine that Lot was a righteous man.
What scripture was that, brother? What scripture was that?
2 Peter chapter 2, 6 through 8. 2 Peter 2, 6 through 8. And so he's called a righteous man. And then when you keep going, he had some troubles, but yet Scripture still calls him a righteous man. So let's go to the end of Genesis 19. So I'm not going to read all this, but if you go to verse 30, we'll just do this as just kind of an introduction. Let's read this. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. Now we don't know why he was afraid, but something made him fearful. You will remember that Zoar was a city that was on the list to be destroyed,
but then he asked for God to save it, to not destroy it. But we're not clued in exactly where the fear came from, so I won't try to speculate about that. But he was afraid enough that the end of verse 30 tells us he went to live in a cave with his 2 daughters. Now just think about where he has fallen from. A very wealthy man who goes to live in a wicked city, loses his possessions, or most of them, loses family, then loses his wife, and now is relegated to living in a cave. This is not luxurious living, most likely, and living in fear.
Seems
Yes.
strange he didn't go back to his uncle Abraham's house.
That's what I would
You would think if all the world was caving in, you'd want to go someplace where you had some protection.
And did he eventually get back to Abraham? Never told that he did. We're ended here, right? That's kind of the real sadness of the story is we don't even have that reunion to occur. It ends in the cave for at least the narrative of Lot's life. He's there with his daughters, and then his daughters decide, well, our prospects for getting married don't look very good. So they devise a plan to get their father drunk and then to go into him. The older does it first and then the younger. They do that, right? He's so intoxicated that the text tells us he didn't even know when they came in or when they left. He seems to have no idea what happened. And this again, is one of those things that's hard to understand. Why would these 2 young women do this? Well, we know he was afraid, all right? Fear, I'm sure they were probably afraid. They probably felt alone. And so they devised this plan to, I guess, find some way out of the situation to have a child with their father.
So they wanted to preserve his lineage.
Yeah, well, that's it. They're afraid that they're not going to be able to get married again, so they're wanting to preserve his lineage, but
He's lost all his
they're
money.
doing it in a wicked way, though. And wickedness on many different levels. Number one, he's their father. They're getting him drunk in order to do it, right? They know he's not going to relent to this desire of theirs because they're getting him drunk, right? And so why would they, what would put them in a place to make that kind of choice?
Because they want to preserve their lineage.
No, that's not what I mean.
Their whole family,
They
there's-
got it from where they came from. They probably-
Exactly.
Right.
Think about the city they came out of, this very wicked city where sexuality, fleshly desire was uninhibited for people. They did whatever they wanted to whomever they wanted to. And so it's not, when you think about that backdrop, it's not that surprising that they don't devise these wicked plans in order to do this. And so they commit this evil act with their father, and they give birth to 2 sons. The first son is named Moab. Does anybody know what Moab is? What that means? What?
Father of the Moabites.
Well, he did eventually become father of Moabites, but the name itself literally means from the father, right? Isn't that interesting? From the father, quite literal. The second one is Ben Ammi, and that one is from his lineage. We get the Ammonites. What do we know about the Ammonites and the Moabite people? They were wicked, and they caused a lot of issues for the people of Israel. So just keep that in mind. Notice where they came from, like this union of a daughter, 2 daughters with their fathers. And Ben Ammon, I was trying to see.
I had his name written down here too, but I can't find it. Let's see. Oh, it means son of my people. And so, so these two young men would end up being the lineage of Lot. And so that ultimately becomes Lot's lineage as we end chapter 19. Very difficult text in some ways, just from the content of it, and the legacy.
The path that a person can take.
Mhm.
It seems maybe insignificant at first, but can lead to all types of discord.
That's absolutely right. And our sin can have long-lasting effects. We need to think about how it's going to affect people down the line from us, and the influence of it. Next time we're together, we're going to go on and talk about Abraham and Abimelech, and then the birth of Isaac, and talk about the great sacrifice of Isaac. Any other questions? Comments? All right. Thank you all.